Was politics always this sort of closely aligned to people's, like to these sort of cultural segments, and it's a big part of our daily,
No.
discussion and identity system? Is this a
It was
new
separate.
thing?
It was something. Remember, it used to be that like people didn't pay enough attention to politics. It's like, be careful what you wish for, which maybe we'll get to later, because sometimes when you get it, it's not what you want. And for years, it was people don't pay enough attention to politics. They're not engaged enough. Now it's like, whoa, wait a second. We don't want you that engaged in this politics.
It feels more like sports now.
Yeah, no, that's what it became, like popular culture.
It's kind of like the NFL in that we have our teams, but it's also bigger than an American sport. It's a global sport.
Yeah, maybe
Right,
it's like World Cup.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Happens every 4 years.
Eurovision. First of all, Alex is not here. This is my fault because we changed the days and then I complained and then it became unclear.
I don't like when you have your fits, when you get really angry with us.
Whatever. It's not angry. I'm not angry.
No, but your executive functioning problems translate into just like kind of projection of your anger.
That is true.
onto the
Anyone
group.
listening to this podcast who has ever sent me an email and not gotten a reply, do not take it personally. This is my executive functioning malfunction. So,
Like I'm brutal. I think I'm more inept than you are, but
oh, thank you.
But I maybe try to bring less righteousness to it when I fuck it up.
Oh, stop. That's not true.
Yeah. We had a bad week on the PVA text threads.
That's why we have to make it like our premium product. I'm talking to these people from Subtext about doing this texting feature that
Yeah, they're doing it
with
at Puck, right? Yeah, Lauren, I saw Lauren's over in Milan.
She just
for
landed
Fashion
in
Week.
Milan. I don't know if that's I talk with some people at Puck and they think it's like good for like events. I don't know if people really want to get like a text message from you.
Well, I think it's good for what's really important with human media now, which is connection and intimacy. So if you feel like you're part of the insider group and you feel like you're the first to know and you feel like you have access and you feel like you know the person, you'll pay.
Yeah. But it's
I think
also
it's really important.
It's not interactive, which is a necessity because, for instance,
well, it is interactive. I sent her a note on the thread. She sent me a note back.
You get it back, but you're just seeing like one way things. And I think one of the big problems with those digital community platforms is they never work. It all becomes your condo board's WhatsApp group. It just becomes a couple of people who are just have a lot of time on their hands and a lot of issues that they want to discuss. And they want to take photos of someone who didn't break down their cardboard.
Someone at Hearst was telling me, they've been playing around with that Oprah was a really successful magazine for many, many years, one of the most successful in the portfolio. And then she sort of decided that while I was there, that she didn't want to continue with the print magazine anymore, just like she, I think, decided at maybe a good time to get out of television. And then Oprah Daily emerged, which is sort of a more kind of intimate digital subscription thing. And they just launched with a company called Circle, I believe, a community solution that ties together a group of subscribers with like direct missives from Oprah. And it's like sort of like a Slack for communities.
Yeah.
And then courses on menopause and weight loss and stuff like that.
Maybe. I don't know. I've checked out Circle. They were a sort of pandemic company, and it's really hard to get people to adopt a new platform. And that's why people end up using like Slack, because everyone, unfortunately, at least in my view, has to spend all this time in Slack, and getting someone to log into another platform is just really difficult. Anyway, I always find these community models very difficult to pull off, much like, as we'll discuss later, content to commerce it sounds great in theory, but then in reality, it's like the history just says it's like almost impossible to pull off. But I want to start by talking about this Google antitrust trial. We are not the people to talk about pre-bid and header bidding and all of the rest. To me, what's most interesting is this narrative shift. And Google is fighting basically a two-front war. In one theater, it has the more serious, I think, antitrust case when it comes to its search dominance. And then there's a smaller theater that is around, it's smaller for Google because it's only a $31 billion business. It's dominance of ad tech. Again, good problems to have. I mean, that's good. It's good to be dominant, I guess. But Google was trying to avoid this going to trial for a while. And it was obvious why they were trying to. It is unleashing a bunch of embarrassing details that make clear that it was responding to the incentives of any quote unquote monopolist. It's not for me to decide if they're a monopolist. I know that they basically control this sector. And they pushed that to the limit, and they took actions that were absolutely against the interests of their advertisers and publishers and the overall ad tech ecosystem. And that's just what companies do. I don't think, despite my self-righteousness, I don't think it's a morality play. I don't think it ever is. It's just incentives. And I think we had to look at it. There is a good chance that Google, this is not like search. They can get rid of GAM, and they can get out of the ad tech business. They can spin off what they built around DoubleClick. And it's not as messy as it is with search or with Chrome and Android. And I think the big legacy of this, I was just writing a piece, and it'll be publishing after this, about how it reminds me a little bit of the Microsoft trial in the 1990s, and particularly that Bill Gates deposition, where Gates really turned from this nerd king into he was evasive, he was like overly aggressive, and he just came off really poorly. Now that was in a person, but I think Google is coming off. And look, there's more to this trial going, and it's really just a B2B story. But Google's coming off really poorly.
He was sitting behind me at the US Open.
Bill Gates?
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
What, shouldn't he be in a box? Were you in a box?
No, I was right down by the...
He like sits with the people?
He was sitting this is probably the first and only time I'll ever have better seats than Bill Gates, but he was
that's
about
like
4
shocking.
rows up. But when I exited,
the CMO
I brushed up against him.
Box.
Well, the guy, I was with someone, a media executive, and he's like, "That's Bill Gates," and like he was literally like 2 feet from us, and he was like, "What should we say?" It was kind of cool. Looks old.
Thanks for Windows.
He's older.
Well, yeah. I mean, he's been through a lot in the last several years. So I think what is going to be really interesting that comes out of this, first of all, is whether they end up splitting it off. I mean, I think everything is lining up with either a voluntary or involuntary split off. They even offered to the European
regulators.
There's
so much more than this, though. Really, are we going to nerd out on here's the thing, Brian. All of ad tech is a parasitic business. And anybody that's worked in publishing has had to live with this reality, which is just like, yeah, we're going to put this tech on your site, or we'll manage this aspect of the stack for you, and we'll only take somewhere between 5 and 10 and 15 or whatever % of the ad revenue that comes in. Or God forbid, the thing that I struggled with from the earliest years is, wait, I'm going to give up essentially, which it would never do in old media, give up the rights to sell my inventory to a third party. Right? Like in the case of an ad network, they're representing you. Early ad networks would go out with a long list of logos and say, here's our inventory that we have. Look, and what they would be doing is they would put up like premium inventory logos at the top, and then they would fulfill it all with Meebo or something like that, like bulk
daisy chain,
impressions.
I think it was, right? Like they would basically
it was all those
to
community sites that had all the page views that had no content costs and all of that. Anyways, it was always a racket, and it always struck me that the idea of giving up rights to my inventory to a third party was just long-term dangerous. And in fact, that's what it became, is because you became highly reliant. It's always a crack pipe. Right? You just become reliant on a third-party revenue line. In this case, every publisher in the world has indirect as a very important revenue line, and half of it literally is being eaten by the bottom feeders in the industry, right? And Google is the king of that. And so it was incremental revenue. You typically had no sales costs on it, so you were really thankful that it was there. And the other big issue is that despite literally 20 years of innovation, the sort of banner industrial complex is kind of shitty. Meaning, we never, only the wall gardens got ad product right from the perspective of scalable, long tail, performance based, data targeted, auction oriented platform. No publisher can invest at that level with that sophistication of technology. And so basically, now what we have is, yeah, there's some nice premium banners that make a lot of sense on premium sites that have brand value. But I would say that, those are under tremendous pressure as more and more traffic moves to a new type of aggregator, which I think we should discuss later because I have some thoughts on AI as the new aggregator and what you do as a publisher and what the consequences are when you think about the new website. I would really like to talk about that. But yeah, was Google like taking more than they should have? Did publishers pay too much? Is it a monopoly? Absolutely. When you look at it, would you rather have Google than a bunch of like Tabulas and like Criteos and all of AdX, like all of the other people that are in the industry picking away at you? I think it's actually the lesser of two evils, ironically.
Well, that's the part I find interesting, just to go back to the original concept, is be careful what you wish for. Publishers have always complained about Google, right? I mean, it might be on background to me or over cocktails or whatever. Like they've always complained about it. But Google, for the most part, and it's changed over the years a little bit, but it's been a benevolent dictator to some degree. I mean, dictators generally do not become benevolent, but there was some kind of symbiosis of the fact that they controlled the distribution, and then they were going to take a piece like on the other side. They're sending you this traffic. Well, they're not. This is not Mother Teresa's orphanage here. I mean, this is, they're going to then take a cut because you're going to use their ad tech, and you can.
It's more like a Nordic country where there was like a steady supply of oil paying for Medicare, and at least there wasn't kind of wars among the different factions.
That's true. By the way, did you know that like Nigeria, what they use their oil revenue for is not like for some sovereign wealth fund or to invest in like human capital, but they got trapped in this thing of then offering basically almost like free fuel to like their citizens. So they're caught in this, but they can't cut it off because people don't like when you take things away. But that's a side story. So let's actually move on then, because I thought that was a very nice, concise point to this new interface. I didn't totally understand what you meant when you put that in the notes. So this is a good time to explain it. So I have no setup to it. You mentioned newsletters as one. I'm like, oh my God, haven't we discussed this before? What is the new interface?
Well, so I sort of stumbled on this and then kind of started to pull back the layers of it. And I think there's a in my mind, I'm developing a kind of a new concept for how I think about the relationship between the front end of a digital property, that's the homepage, potentially like section aggregation, right, which is typically a section page on any site, and the endpoint, which is an article page, right? So the prevailing kind of the thing that we all said to one another when Google took over distribution for most publishers is every page is a homepage, right? So that you didn't really have a homepage anymore. It was probably sub 10% of your traffic. People weren't coming to your front door. We trained consumers not to type in URLs. They either went to Google or got snippets of news syndicated inside of social environments. And then those platforms became increasingly powerful, and creators just ended up kind of moving directly to those platforms as a creation distribution mechanism for content. And I was going through an exercise with a group of folks looking at a new homepage, and what I thought was a kind of an unfortunate project where we're redesigning our homepage and section pages. It's going to take 6 months. Here's our objectives in terms of representing the brand as a metric, whatever that means, on the homepage. And basically, we're reimagining it. Just think of it as a whole bunch of blocks of content, right? Image, headline, deck, arranged by topic or frequency or top performing or whatever people do on high velocity web pages, right? Homepages. And I had looked at what Matt Sanchez had done at Yahoo in creating a sort of aggregation layer where AI in the section pages like culture or like celebrity on Yahoo had kind of bubbled up a paragraph of content. And then I was thinking about two other things. Just bear with me here. One was how we're training a new generation to get at content. And I got to believe, and every generation that uses tools of the internet as their predominant interface points gets retrained. And so what did Instagram and Facebook teach us? They taught us that the feed was how you delivered content to people, like thumb, 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 mobile phone, feed, 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 right? And now what we're doing more of, I think, is asking a question and getting text back. And that's ChatGPT. And so in that text, when I say, tell me more about the new book from Yuval Harari, anyway, and it'll go out and it'll deliver a response back to you, right? And so I was thinking, and then I was thinking about, we hated websites so much that we started delivering content and relying on newsletters, right? And I think of the newsletters that I like most from major media brands and their summaries of what they've written in the past X period of time, right? Like a summary of all the stuff you get.
They're solving the problem that they created, right? Like they're writing all kinds of things that are too long. I mean, this is the Axios conceit, right? It's like every single 750 word story should be 250 words.
Right. So Axios kind of did it through email. Morning Brew did it through email. All the major media brands started doing daily,
classic
curation.
hack, though. Classic hack.
Right. But so why? Well, ads didn't overwhelm the page. It forced a economy on the people that sent that content out. It came to me in my mailbox, and it sort of respected my time, and it was timely. And I was like, well, that's a major new media format broadly. And I was like, the interface layer on a new homepage is going to be dramatically changed by AI. Now, this is a theme we've touched on in the past on this podcast, and that if really what you want is the key metric, I think, if you're redesigning like a homepage, as an example, is can you actually get people to come back more frequently? Whatever your frequency metric is, right? And maybe there's some other stuff around getting people into pages, because you still need page views, because you still have to make money, because in media, you always have to have a foot in the past, foot in the future. If you don't start disrupting yourself, to me, you're kind of fucked. And so I was thinking that in fact, the mental model for the new homepage is much more like the newsletter and heavily informed by the way we are going to consume content through a chatbot. So if I arrived at a homepage and the first blurb was like a paragraph that said, here's what you need to know right now, and it was auto-generated, right? And then, there could be links, there could be utility, there could be community that were all intelligently connected to that. That would, and by the way, if you have a piece of data on me, like for example, I'm on the board of a soccer company, it's called Football Co. If you know my home team and that blurb of content is customized through that lens, even better. And if you know three other, my secondary team, or where I'm traveling, or where I live, you can, or who my favorite players are, you could start to customize it. But the interface layer is going to take the corpus of content from that media brand and potentially from providers that are tangential to it. They're going to summarize it up as the first connection point to a bunch of content. And then closely related to that, I was thinking, why is the article page the way it is? And what I mean by that is a third of the page is literally the headline, depending on how big the font is, right? You got the big headline that we've been trained to read, and then there's a deck, and then there's a byline, and then increasingly, because of Business Insider and because of Axios, we now have summary bullets. And then we have this story that just feels like the waste from the carcass. And it just strikes me that if the article page was intelligent and far more like the response I get from AI, I have a better shot at creating what I really want as a publisher, which is going to be really hard for the next generation, is finding a little bit of intimacy, a unique moment, a unique connection that I can create with a reader. If we don't do that, if we rely on the thing I described at the beginning, which is a bunch of boxes on a homepage that's really slow, that's really a place to host ads, to take you into these dumb article pages, like that contrasted with the aggregator, and the aggregator is ChatGPT, you're fucked. Right. And so if we want someone to interact directly, listen, you're going to put toll booths up around the aggregator, and companies like Tollbit are going to say, listen, if your content floats into the aggregator, you're going to get paid and stuff. But let's be honest, that's great incremental revenue. That's not going to pay all your bills. And if you don't find a way to create intimacy in this kind of new AI world by using technology intelligently to create better interface to information for consumers, you may as well not even publish to your own website, in my opinion.
Yeah. Well, that's why
and
I
so
think
that's the model, right? I kind of sketched it out, and I want to add one thing before I end my little diatribe here. And one is that a new aggregators like Perplexity. Now, Forbes went after Perplexity for sucking up their content and basically regurgitating it without changing it. That should be stopped, and that's something we need to be very, very careful about. But one thing I've been really curious about is Perplexity is pumping out content to multiple channels and multiple content types with automation. You get the Perplexity email. I listen to it all the time because I'm really curious about it. And it's called Discover Daily. It's read by a male and female. I think the male robot's called Winston and the female one's called like Heidi or something. And so, of course, British accent. And so there's a male and female robot newsreader. The news itself is aggregated by AI or created by AI. And by the way, it's not a terrible product. I'm not listening to it because I want to hear like the all-in guys be cute with each other, or me and you like trade jabs and me make fun of Alex or whatever. But I'm listening to it because it's kind of straight to the vein information and it's well made.
Well, that's okay. A couple things on that. One is okay. It was very well done. One is text the mode, right? Because what you're talking about, it's going to be a mode sometimes, but I think a lot of times text is not going to be the answer, and audio is that's why I find audio a really good product, because when you think about, I always says, nobody gets up and says, yesterday was a good day, but I wish I spent more time looking at my phone. It's like the same as like getting off a flight and being like, it was a good trip, but I wish I had more to drink during the flight. Nobody does that. You just think it's not good. So people there is going to be a reaction.
I don't mind a cocktail or two on the plane.
Okay. Well, it's different. You're super dehydrated up there. Get the Bloody Mary mix. I'm going to be like Anthony Bourdain. Get the Bloody Mary mix.
Okay, but finish your point though. So
my point is that for a lot of needs, text is not the answer, and I think this is a challenge for a lot of publishers in that what they're good at, right? What they've become very good at is a shrinking market, and they need to find ways to respond to changing consumer habits. And I think the big change of AI is going to be changing a lot of consumer expectations. I believe it's happening. And when you look at an article page, and I always ask this at the dinners that we do, is do you really think that people are going to be hitting back buttons in 5 years on your web page? It's just really difficult for me to believe that. And I can't believe that the mix is going to be so text heavy, because a lot of times you want just the answer, and audio is fine. Video is good for, obviously, for entertainment and for getting people deeper engagement. But I think there's too much text, to be honest with you. And the other thing I would just say is I think about it as like a choose your own adventure thing. And so you're going to have to like segment your audience. Like I wrote last week about how audience segmentation is like the new surface area, and that like in a more with less here, everyone's going to have smaller audiences than they had before, or at least appeared to have, with those massive ComScore numbers. Those are gone. It's not coming back, right? And so how do you create that surface area? Well, you get really smart about segmenting your audience. I mean, because then you can actually make more money off of those segments, but you can also provide a differentiated experience to those segments. And that's, again, why I think texting is really interesting in the text world, is because you should be able to have different segments get different types of content based on what you know about them. I mean, we've been talking about personalization forever in this industry, and it's not really, it hasn't really come to fruition. I don't see it like on sites. Maybe ESPN gives me like Philadelphia.
Well, but it's kind of funny.
Watching.
I have so many things to react to that. One is what people thought of personalization was usually hamstrung by a lack of supply of content, right? So a publisher wanted a personalized experience, but they actually didn't have the goods. Like we did personalize. TikTok is highly personalized. The algorithm personalizes it because there's an immense corpus of content from which to personalize.
Yeah, you got to match.
ChatGPT is the knowledge of the world personalized to your question, right? So it's massively personalized. But the idea that I got a signal from you, Brian, and I'm on the New York Times, and suddenly I'm going to massively modify the feed because I know something magical about you. Actually, it doesn't matter. You know, it's interesting. I had one other thought I wanted to just share on the Google thing because you made me think of it. Is it really is yesterday's war? I used to marvel at how that industry, despite the fact that it's like it is a bit of a parasitic industry, that we could instantly calculate the value of a person, auction them off to a buyer, and deliver an ad in the moment within a millisecond to a person at the other end of a connection. And I always thought that was like a huge achievement. Like the whole complete middleware of ad tech created a way to auction off attention in a really systematic way. But what happens with all of these monopoly things by the time the government steps in is the game has changed.
Right.
So like cracking down on the banner economy that Google dominates, like who really gives a fuck? Meanwhile, retail media, mostly controlled by corporations that have their own platforms outside of Google, Amazon, Meta, Google, in a different way through search, and then all of the people that participate in the retail media space have taken like 20% of the market in the last 3 years. Retail media is what publishers should be worried about.
Oh, for sure. I mean, that
more
money
than anything else.
That money is not just from co-op budgets. It's not just from shelf takers and all the rest of that stuff. I mean, it is. God.
No,
it is.
It's no content cost. It's all data leverage.
And these businesses have terrible margins. And so this is just straight, pure margin, straight to the vein, as you would say.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's a great point. I do agree.
So this whole thing is a big charade, and it's a waste of government money. And it's a waste. Just let them go.
You think it's a waste?
I mean, other than a big corporate slapdown, whatever.
Yeah,
yes, it's a waste of money.
I mean, I don't know if it's a waste though. I mean, just like the case against Microsoft, really, I think
here's where you and I differ on this shit, Brian.
The rise of Google happened at that time. It tied up Microsoft.
Yeah, so that somebody else could create a browser and somebody else could create a better phone and someone. Yeah. And then Microsoft went on to dominate a different Office segment. But I get it. We got the iPhone. It's sort of like you saying, yay, Kamala's going to give small business some kind of incentive or tax incentive. Or it's like,
I'll take
great, we're going to subsidize the creation of new homes. You know what's going to happen? We're going to create another bureaucratic layer. We're going to create a new department. There's going to be all of these companies that siphon money from the government and build crappy places that are not tuned to real market dynamics, and no one's going to be better off for it.
Well, I need to defend myself a little bit here because
you want to get some kind of like small business loan from the government.
I don't want a small business loan from the government. I will take preferential tax treatment. I don't think I should pay taxes for a few years, but that's me. No, I think that, again, to go back to be careful what you wish for, this, whether it's a declining segment of the market or not, I don't know if like what comes out of this case is necessarily quote unquote better, because like you said, like the structural forces of the market are just making this part of it less important, right? There's just so many different ways and more effective ways, frankly, that advertisers can reach consumers than this entire convoluted, very impressive. The idea of doing this millisecond targeting, and very impressive. The end results are less impressive than the actual process, mind you, I think, as any consumer would attest to. But yeah, I mean, it's a decline. I think you have to be careful what you wish for at the end of the day, because it could end up in a worse situation, right? I mean, everyone complained about ad tech with all the logos on Terry's slide. Well, Google was just the logo at the end of the day.
Put what you hear through a filter. Terry Kawaja at Luma, whatever you think of Terry, is obviously cheering for disruption in the market.
Yeah.
Because, that will mean people have to sell
companies. He wants consolidation because he makes money.
He wants the market to reshuffle because that's how he makes money. Let's be clear.
I'm not naive. I'm many things. Well, maybe I'm a little naive, but I don't think so. By the way, I just wanted to add a little ad tech drama. And I can't believe, if I was an editor still, I would be assigning the story. There's no stories about what's going on at Open Web. So they came out with, they have this commenting technology and they raised a ton of money. I never really understood. They raised a ton of money. But the chairman of the board came out and said, "Oh, thank you for your service. We've got a new CEO," the chairman of the board. And then next thing you know, Nadav's on LinkedIn saying, "I've not stepped down as Open Web CEO." And so they have a situation, he's the founder of the company, where the board says there's a new CEO and the founder, who's the CEO, is like, "No, I'm still CEO." Please someone report this out. That's a fascinating story. I don't know if you have any thoughts on it.
I'll try to be brief. I know a little bit about it.
Oh, you do?
Yes. So Nadav is an impressive dog.
He's like a special forces guy, isn't he, or something?
He's a mercenary. He's a sniper. He is one of the most relentless people I've ever met. Now, the way I met Nadav is he called me basically every week for 6 months. When I hung up on him and told him to fuck off because I didn't want his commenting platform. And then he wanted to put all kinds of widgets and shit all over the pages to create higher engagement. And it was going to do all these great things. And then he wanted to own ad rights on the pages, which is like the classic story of ad tech. I'm just going to put a little snippet of JavaScript.
One line of JavaScript.
Yeah. Then I want ad rights. So he had an okay platform. I needed a solution for identity and for commenting. I didn't want any of the other junk, and I wanted to pay for it on a SaaS basis. I negotiated hard. We got a good deal, and it's been a fine relationship. And Nadav did that in several places, found that being a kind of commenting arms supplier to the publishing industry wasn't terrific, bought an SSP so that they could also supply ads in at the bottom top. I don't know where they put their ads. They put them somewhere. They bought this French SSP. And I would go to lunch with him now and again, always an admirer of his energy and his kind of drive. And he did a couple things really well. He created a fancy board. Scott Galloway was on the board and a bunch of other people. I think the name and the packaging of Open Web, they spent a lot on design and they made it feel like they were these sort of advocates for the open web and that they were far more than like your kind of standard issue commenting technology. So there was an aspirational quality to this thing that enabled them to raise a couple $100 million and get $150 million, a $1.5 billion-ish valuation. But you have to go first principles on this stuff. Because when you would talk to Nadav, you never really understood what he was saying. It's like a commenting platform with an SSP. I get that. But then it was like, then you could tell things weren't going great because it would be like, and we're doing CTV. It was always like the next thing, And
retail media comes in the mix.
Yeah, or retail media. Yeah. CTV or retail media, totally. And I thought, this isn't great. And I think really what happened is there's more pressure on the sort of economy that he lives inside of. The investors, they think it was Insight Partners that put a lot of the money in, said things aren't going well. And they thought this was the right time to kind of move on. And what happens when you take that kind of money is the people actually that give you the money have a lot of power.
Well, yeah, you can't go founder mode when you own a minority of the company.
When you own a minority, when you've taken secondary, vitally, so congrats. He took some secondary and got a nice place in Williamsburg. But like a couple $100 million is a lot of money. So you can do stuff with that. Anyway, That's the story. But there's going to be many, many more of those stories in the ad tech world because it's a daunting place right now.
Yeah, no, and there's lots of changes going on there. Part of it scares me because they're my partners. The other thing is Airmail is up for sale. It's weird. I feel like Airmail's been around for a long time, but it's only like 3 years old. I mean, basically, it's Graydon Carter created a newsletter business with some events attached to it, and it was going to be for basically people who are aspirants to the class.
It's kind of like Monocle 2.0 meets Vanity Fair.
Right. Yeah. But like aspirants, I feel like all of these things, they present themselves as for this globetrotting elite. But the reality is there's only so many people in that globetrotting elite. And so if you're selling like $100 newsletter subscriptions, it's for aspirants. It's not for the people in the actual on the yachts. It's for the people who pine to be on the yachts, I think. So, look, newsletters are great. They're
so
cheap
what do you
to
want?
produce.
Let's ask you some questions on this. So they raised $32 or $34 million. It's clearly anchored to the largesse of Graydon Carter. When I get my email I'm an aspirant. When I get my email from Airmail on the weekend, it's Graydon Carter here. So it's, they're selling the company because he's exiting stage left, because he's tired, because what? And you have a media brand that they, in some ways were really forward thinking, right? Like they kind of pushed into the email space before others did. They tried to bring the uniqueness and kind of luxury veneer back to a media brand that we missed with the generation of BuzzFeeds and scale players. So hats off to them. But now to get the capital back at a decent return, they got to sell it for $60 million. So it's a $60 million business. I'm sure it doesn't make any money.
It has 34 employees.
Okay.
It charges $80 for an annual subscription.
Yeah.
Like those numbers just don't work. I don't understand raising $32 million for what's in essence a newsletter business with a couple of pop-up retail. I don't understand where that money goes. Does it pay Alessandra Stanley? I don't understand. I guess I just feel like in this...
They're not cheap. They have a lot of high-profile writers. This is a $10 million payroll? Something like that? Like, is it making money, Brian? Do you think they sell a little bit of advertising?
No. Hell no. It's just the numbers don't work. I don't understand these type of businesses that it's like the biggest advantage of building a media business, a publishing business at this time is the unbelievable low costs of doing it. And to then basically do the same mistakes that were done in a previous generation of raising venture capital. Media is not a venture business almost always. It just puts you behind the 8 ball. I don't get it.
They both sort of emerged from the same genetic pool, both Puck and Airmail, right? There's lots of connections, starting with John's connection to Graydon, and
TPG was, I think, involved.
TPG was somehow involved in both. I think John advised Airmail for a while. So the question is Puck any different?
I think so, because it's broader, right? So they've focused on, and Puck just turned 3. They had a very nice anniversary party.
You're saying, did you go?
Yeah, I did.
Oh, I didn't get the invite.
Really? Oh, it was nice. There was a step and repeat.
They would like, I suspect, to buy your business and make you the
great.
Make you the media marketing vertical.
No, that's not for me. They have a different lane than I do. Anyway, I think what they've done smart, I think, is tackle real verticals, the power verticals. Like, I get how it all adds up, right? It's not around curios of a person, right? I mean, it has, you focus on, and some verticals are stronger than others, but you focus on the power verticals of media, of politics, of Silicon Valley, although I don't know if they've fully gone into Silicon Valley, and Hollywood, right? And you've got defined ad markets in there with the for your consideration ads. You have all the Washington, D.C. money that is not as great as it once was. I've noticed, but that goes into the, hey, regulate us, but don't regulate us in a way that hurts our business, but helps our business. I mean, that,
Yeah, and it's also that sort of unaccountable corporate advertising budget that you
yeah,
have to put somewhere. Yeah.
and that's great. The subs then also supplement it. I understand the puck model. I feel like better than I do the airmail model. Now, whether that, they've raised a fair bit of money too. So they, just in talking to them, they want to build a very big business. I think the question with all of these businesses, how big the businesses can get, because I like to compare and contrast Puck and Semaphore because they sort of are in the same vintage. Semaphore is going to be 2, I think, next month, and Puck just turned 3, so it's tidy.
They both execute pretty well, actually. I would say my big knock on both of them from a reader perspective is a complete lack of economy in how they in their formats. The Puck articles are so long.
Yeah,
They're so long, and so are Semaphores. And I need more. The FT is
Wait, you
way
think
more.
Semaphores are long?
They can be, but pucks are very long. I like the FT better because there's an economy to their article structure that I appreciate as a reader.
Yeah, they actually use the constraints of print. I feel like it translates well to digital. Weirdly enough, because like they if you look at like how they handle print at the FT, the front page articles there's no jump, which is great. I don't think anyone wants to hunt through it for like A6 to understand it.
Yeah, I mean, back to the homepage thing. It's interesting to watch the evolution of my consumption on New York Times that way. To me, the homepage isn't a navigation point; it's a product. I read the headline. They put enough deck in there so that you can get the gist of the story. And you'll notice, by the way, that they're increasingly putting vertical video on their homepage.
Oh yeah,
and it's without a long 30-second ad in front of it, because they have the subscriber relationship where they can pay for that video in different ways. I really think it's a great product. Just their homepage is a good product.
Yeah.
That's not my good product this week, though. Don't worry, listeners.
Yeah. But actually, that's a good point about the newsletter. Because, I mean, a lot of newsletters now, I don't know if you've noticed, but like the weight has shifted from treating the newsletter as a product unto itself to going back to it as a promotional vehicle or some kind of hybrid of it, right? You have to optimize to something. And because, again, this is the platform risk, because everyone likes to act like email is a way to get out of like the control of like platforms. Not the case, right? Like you still have a technology company that is the gatekeeper of your emails. All the open rate data is like a mess. You can't trust it because of Apple. Apple just auto opens all these emails. They think it's a privacy violation. I have no idea why it is. We have so many bigger problems in this world. But then now everyone has to have click rates. So now for it to be visible in the inbox, your incentives are to make sure people click on something. So then all of a sudden, what you're doing again is the best part to me of email was that you can get a piece of information there and then go on with your day, rather than clicking on something, going to a web page where someone can like do something to you, throw an ad in front of you, do an autoplay, get you to take some action. I don't know. It's another example of that. But one of the things with Semaphore that I find interesting is that as it's developed, it's literally a Quartz do-over. Like they just came out with I want to talk with Justin about this, because I mean, Justin Smith was one of the founders of Quartz when he was at the Atlantic, and Quartz, it never lived up to its hype. Obviously, I think they did some really interesting things. When you think about like, when we talk about the homepage, they turned their homepage into a chat experience. And I think like that, they might have been ahead of their time a little bit with how they were thinking of things. And Zach Seward, who was behind a lot of those initiatives, is now at the Times as their like AI guru. But they have, Semaphore is doing a next 3 billion conference. When I was like, that sounds very familiar. And that's because like Quartz had the next billion conference. So it just always goes
we all just have one.
No, that's very few. I always say there's only one Bill Belichick who's like creating a different game plan for each team. Like most people, they got an offense, they're going to run it. So Food 52, Mark Stenberg. Mark, if you're listening, great piece. A classic inside the mess at X piece.
And a nice piece, because it was like there was some optimism in it, right? Like
they got him on the phone. This is a smart thing. They got him on the phone. A lot of times companies like go into like porcupine mode, right? When a reporter comes, when things haven't been going great. But Erica Bodden, I guess, is now the CEO. She came from Barstool, had a great run at Barstool, right? And she's the new CEO. She hasn't really been doing a lot of like interviews, I feel like, about Food 52. She's mostly been doing like she's like an influencer now.
I think this was like the first big one. Erica's a super cool person and an impressive person.
No, I like Erica. She's great. She'd be great on this podcast. But anyway, they brought her in as CEO. Food 52, it was a food website that then became a content and commerce play, right? They started down the affiliate route, and then it was like, we're going to make our own products and sell them. And I consider this the TPG model, right? TPG funded Barstool. TPG has properties like Meat Eater. They're very big into this content to commerce model. They've got that Epic Gardening. They got some really interesting companies that they back, and Food 52 is one of them. So they plowed a bunch of money into Food 52 during the good old days during the pandemic. But the numbers that Mark got, assuming these are correct, are rough, very rough. Basically, that Food 52's revenue went from the combined company when they bought Schoolhouse was 120 million in 2021. They're down to like 28 million. Like they
28 is just the Food 52 revenue.
Okay, so then the Food 52 business went from 80 million to 28 million.
I think that's right. Yeah.
What?
What are the questions? What questions do you have?
How? You take a bunch of funding. So they close around with TPG in 2021. Look, it was crazy times then. They raised 80 million in 2021. They had a $300 million valuation. Then they started buying different brands. They bought a cookware brand, Dansk, okay, and a home decor brand that was Schoolhouse, right? So they spent a bunch of money on buying their own brands. And the idea was they were going to turn their audience into customers of these brands. This is yet another example. Hodinkee, which is another TPG property that completely hit a wall.
TCG,
sorry. That has completely hit a wall with this approach. And I don't know, is it time to put a fork in the dreams of content to commerce?
Well, I don't know. I have a few remarks on this because I've watched it pretty closely. I know the people, I like the people a lot. I think that TCG widely said there needs to be a different model in connecting either content and IP critically, and I think there's a difference, to a revenue stream, and that being entirely reliant on advertising revenue wasn't the kind of assets that they were interested in. They liked Food 52 because actually Amanda did an amazing job. Amanda was a New York Times food person and had created a community model at Food 52 where people would submit recipes. And the early audiences of Food 52 were really connected to the brand, to Amanda, and to the mission of the company. And so they early on, and when they were looking for funding, had stepped into commerce, selling things like early on this apron and a cutting board, items that were unique to them, and they sold lots of them. And they realized there was an opportunity to get into. So they got more and more into commerce. And I think that some of the challenges were as follows. One is the connection between a recipe, say, and SKUs that you have in your store isn't super effective. So one doesn't always lead to another. The consumption of that content doesn't lead to a transaction intimately. And the problem with that is that you start to question why you create the content in the first place, unless it's being paid for by some other means. Then what happens as a company is you get into having to manage two businesses. One is sell media to pay for your content, and then build a commerce business on the other side. We've talked about this before. Complexity plus complexity equals, in many cases, shit show. They hired in a gentleman who was ex-Williams-Sonoma, to be the CEO and really push hard into commerce. Just before that, they had bought this great brand Schoolhouse and this heritage brand Dance. And those were profitable, or at least Schoolhouse was, and doing fine. But once they started to kind of go full into commerce, they lost their connection, their intimacy with their audience. Their homepage became like basically an e-commerce homepage. They added tons of SKUs. They got into the sort of discounting cycle.
This is
And
the same thing that happened to Hodinkee.
yeah, except that Hodinkee struggled because you can't actually sell the watches that people want, like Rolex, inside of their model. So you have to sell all the second tier watches. And then they also bought a marketplace for used stuff. But so there's slightly different issues, but tons of SKUs, not enough uniqueness. It started to look like mass retail, except they didn't have the advantages of mass retail in that those people were good at it. Those people were omni-channel. Those people had stores everywhere. Those people had well-honed supply chains. And so they just lost money and they lost their way. So the media business suffered, the relationship with the customer suffered, and the commerce business didn't make any money outside of Schoolhouse, which was kind of trucking along and doing well. Now, what Erica had done so amazingly well at Barstool is find a way to take what was a real brand, real personalities, real connection to an audience, and actually real difference in the market in terms of how it was positioned and perceived, and turn that into like pizza sales, right? Or turn that into merch sales.
Wow.
And like, no, but they sold a lot of stuff.
Okay, if gambling didn't get legalized, that doesn't,
and gambling,
that business doesn't look like it looked.
Okay,
and
but
by the way, it didn't convert really well. Look at the massive write down that Penn took. So I mean, look, all credit for building the business for the exit, but I'm not sure if that model has
the
really
postscript
worked.
on it was that he bought it back for nothing. So
great.
Truth to what you're saying, like it was a bit of a
some
bubble.
Gambling book losing a bunch of money. I don't care about.
Right. So what is Erica doing now? Trying to bring the uniqueness back to the brand, focusing on handmade products, limited runs, cool shit that you can't get anywhere else, and then empowering creators to be part of. They have this amazing office at Food 52 down on the water.
It's a Navy
Yards. It's so beautiful, and they have all these incredible kitchens and stuff. So they're going to bring a bunch of people.
It's hard to get to. I mean,
it is hard to get to, but it's really fabulous. And so they're going to try to create more IP, embrace like way more voices, and kind of find their mojo again, and then correct the merchandising strategy. And I hope she does it. I really like the people, and I think she's a really great operator.
100% agreed. I think as cautionary tales pile up, right, and they all are different in their own ways, but I don't think that this is not the model. I think it was just overblown. Like I'm sure
commerce business with low margin, undifferentiated SKUs against a partially aligned content model is not a business. Nope. You're not going to make any money.
Okay. Well, that's a happy note. Should we get to good product?
Let's do it. Let's do it. Good product. Good product. I'm really into this thing that you talk about a lot, which is and I don't understand how the information space works. I don't understand, and I haven't I guess I'm getting a better understanding, but I didn't really appreciate what, say, a person like Trump saw in our information space that we didn't see, and how his combination of shamelessness and lying and kind of creating the kind of thing of the day trumped any kind of virtue of truth, and ended up building an army underneath of him, and a presidency, and maybe another one. So, and it to me is very much a function of how media distribution and kind of the way information moves has changed. So I'm trying to understand that better. And a few things that that stood out to me this week. The first is I'm reading Yuval's new book called Nexus. There we go. Can you see it? Which is really a historical view on how information shapes societies, and over back from the Romans, the Bible, the Bolsheviks, all the way through the kind of populist moment we're in now, and looking critically at how AI is going to change the power structures in the world. And so I think that's really, really fascinating. I'll report back as I get through more of
I
the
mean, he
book.
goes back to the Stone Age, so this is a broad sweep.
He's really an easy writer to read, so I appreciate that. I also like to read, although sometimes his politics irritate me. Ryan Broderick can be quite strident, but spends his waking hours exploring the nooks and crannies of the information space.
Garbage Day. It's a great publication.
Garbage Day always highlights where weird shit comes from. And now Ryan has a podcast called Panic World. And like last week's episode was just on the origins of the like cough syrup chicken thing, like where that came from, how it spread, like, you know, what it actually meant to the world.
Yeah. No, I appreciate him because he takes, first of all, he's incredibly prolific. And as anyone's, I'm like, I can't believe he can write this much. Just shocking. But also because he takes a very rigorous approach to an area that I think a lot of people just look at as unimportant. But it's obvious, I'm sure, in Yuval Harari's book that you have to like truly understand it. I don't think many sort of traditional thinkers in this area truly do, and particularly in reporters. Like it's just not. It's starting to get covered more seriously. But that's where Taylor Lorenz, I give her a lot of credit. She saw very early on that an area that people were dismissing was incredibly important. And
yeah, she did. She did. And she has a new podcast too. And it's not quite as good. It's called Power User, I think, on the Vox network. But then you sent an article around from your favorite publication, Pirate Wires, which is a kind of right-wing outlet led by, what's his name?
Michael Solana.
Mike Solana. And they had done a pretty interesting interview with Jack from Twitter. Jack Dorsey. And some of the comments he made in there, like, was his push to get the underlying protocol at Twitter be part of essentially the public domain. So there was distance between a kind of open source protocol that controlled the core flow of information and the interface that sat on top of it, so that there was always there was essentially a disconnect between, you know, or like, so there was like an accountability split around what actually was put into the world and the interface that sat on top of it, wherein you would have things like algorithms that you could select, where Twitter would be a good company because it controlled interface and monetization and algorithm selection. But like the content you weren't responsible for because it existed inside of this public protocol.
Yeah.
And
well, it's
and
a
so
dodge. Right.
Well,
I mean, it's a dodge. It's like, oh, look, all these people are saying these horrible things. We don't want to be responsible for it. So let's create some mechanism that we can offload these bad assets.
True. But think about it. The point he makes, and it's kind of an obvious one, is it's so hard for these platform companies to basically be in charge of what should be disseminated and what should not be, and be at the front lines of the free speech debate. And so to me, that is an incredibly difficult place to be in, particularly as you span states, nation states, and have different policies all around the world. This is a really, really difficult place for private companies to be.
I get that. I can remember early on, I think I interviewed David Kirkpatrick, who wrote one of the first biographies of Mark Zuckerberg. And he made the point that in early Facebook, Zuckerberg would always talk about Facebook as a utility versus MySpace. Because you say MySpace is about entertainment and all this thing, but this is utility, right? And the lawyers, and they finally got lawyers, said, Mark, you got to stop. You got to stop saying that. And that's how platform came in, because utilities, governments didn't understand this stuff, but utilities, they understand, because utilities are, even if they're in the private domain, they're highly regulated. Okay. And that's why we have platforms and not utilities. And yeah, it's like he made the point that it is impossible also with a brand advertising model, which to me has been obvious for a while now. And the fact that Elon Musk is attacking brands, it's not a mistake. I'm getting all the time on X. They're using anybody who uses pay us so you don't have to see our ads has zero faith in their advertising business. I mean, first of all, how insulting is that to your customers, your advertisers, if you're saying, hey, get away from them, pay us so you don't have to like hear from them.
I
Like
have
I've
less
never
of a
understood
problem
that.
with that. I think the point Jack
Would you do
makes
that
is
at Hearst? Be like, okay, yeah.
I mean, I think there's a lot of
ads.
publications where people want an ad light experience as part of the subscription bundle. The point Jack Dorsey makes in the article is that Twitter will never be a good brand environment. And
No.
unless it figures out how to be a response play to build direct response ad platform, they're never going to get anywhere on the ad side. Anyway, that's not what the good product is about.
Okay.
What about the reveal? What is a good product? And this is going to be a little unexpected. We know Steve Ballmer, right? Steve Ballmer, the blustery, kind of semi-successful
Semi-successful.
CEO.
He's one of the richest people in the world.
100%. He made a lot of money. As CEO, I think there were a lot of criticisms of how he did it and how they lost a bunch of markets and could really only succeeded where kind of the direct sales muscle inside of companies, which, Steve Ballmer was the king of, right? Like he was the ultimate B2B salesman. Anyway, it doesn't matter because he's had a moment to reflect and use his wealth, right, to buy a basketball team and the Clippers.
LA Clippers.
And to kind of be a more interesting guy. And I really admire that. And so he uses his money to create something called Just the Facts.
No, USA Facts. I love USA Facts.
Well, I think the show on YouTube is called Just the Facts.
Oh, okay. But the overall organization is USA Facts.
And I'm like, this is kind of interesting. One gets surfaced to me with the YouTube algorithm, and it's on the US federal budget. And it's maybe a 6-minute video that breaks down where revenue comes from and where the money's spent. And he narrates it. He does a good job narrating it, and it has lots of infographics and tells the story in an extremely clear way. And I think as a citizen running up to the election, just understanding where the money goes is your responsibility as a voter. When you break it down, Brian, there's so little money in the discretionary bucket. I mean, it's trillions of dollars, but like how much of it is debt service, how much of it is entitlements in Medicare and Social Security, and how much of it is military. It's like, unless attacking the deep state is one thing, right, from a political perspective, but actually finding where the money is. So we are going to shrink the size of the American, of the public sphere, so that we can align revenues with expenses is really important for citizens to understand.
Yeah, but I said we didn't want to get political, but yes, that's why all the fights right now are over inconsequential idiocy. Like, are we going to tax overtime or tips or any of that stuff? Nobody's talking about the massive parts of the budget. They're just talking about these little teeny things.
Well, no one wants to look at the revenue side, right? And the fact that most of it comes from personal taxes and a very small amount relatively comes from corporate taxes. But that's one thing. But that's fine. You tax the end of the line. But unless there's fundamental restructuring in how we manage expense for entitlements, military, and get the debt service down, nothing's going to change. And we have politicians out making promises of where they're going to fund new housing and give Brian Morrissey tax breaks for his small business. But like really understanding the big picture is great. And I applaud Steve Ballmer and My Good Product this week for making Just the Facts.
I agree, because USA Facts that he started, Poppy McDonald, who used to be, I think she was the president of The Atlantic, maybe she was the publisher of The Atlantic. She's now the president at USA Facts. I did a podcast with her a couple of years ago about this initiative. And I, leaving aside the specifics of the debt, what they're trying to do, and I think it was a little bit ahead of its time, is create some kind of shared reality in which we can have actual discussions. And that sounds very basic, but they were like, okay, how do we get as close to reality as possible? We have to establish common facts. You can have different opinions, you can have different viewpoints on what it means to have those facts, but if we don't start from a common set of facts. And so the entire concept of it, I really agree with. I don't know if it can break through because I don't necessarily see a massive appetite for that. But it's absolutely admirable, I think, the effort of what they're trying to do, because the only way we can have productive conversations is if we agree on some sense of reality. And that usually comes down to some aspect of data. So that's good.
Okay, so that's how I got there. That was my good product. I wanted to provide some background for it. But Brian, I know you have something about suburban restaurants or something.
Mine is, of course you did this to sort of disadvantage me. I mean, mine was a little bit more lighthearted. I went back to the Philadelphia area, suburban Philadelphia, not where I grew up, but near where I grew up. It's my mother's 85th birthday. Happy birthday, Mom.
Woo-hoo, happy birthday.
So we went out to dinner, and I'm always reminded, I haven't lived in the suburbs outside of a little period during the pandemic when I fled New York like a coward. But going back there, I'm always amazed. American suburbs are amazing. This country is amazing. It is so, so rich. It's amazing that how rich this country is. And I didn't grow up in any sort of super fancy area or anything, but they're just everywhere in the United States. But one of the aspects that I love about suburban America is that you can go to a pretty good Italian restaurant. All of them have a pretty good Italian restaurant that's in a strip mall. It's next to a dry cleaners. In Pennsylvania, because they have weird liquor laws, they have a BYOB. And my approach to all these is you got to get the chicken parm, because chicken parm is the test of an American Italian restaurant. It is a uniquely American.
I like the vodka sauce, like the penne alla vodka.
Well, that's because, okay. But you're going to what's that douchey place?
Carbone. Theirs is good. It's spicy.
That place is, I don't like.
No, it's bullshit. I get it.
I went one time. Anyway.
No, they took the suburban concept and made it, acceptable for rich people by increasing the prices. Yeah.
But the chicken parm, do you know how the chicken parm came to be? Because it didn't come from Italy. Basically, Italian Americans, I guess they came from like Sicily or Southern Italy, where there's a lot of eggplant parm is the dish there. So whatever, melanzane di parmigiano.
It's like pizza being invented in Canada and basketball,
But no, this is pretty American. Basically, they looked at what their German neighbors were doing with schnitzel, and they're like, "That's pretty good." But wait a second, we know how to level this up, and that's how we got chicken parm. So I think anytime.
So was it good?
All right. So here's because I have to.
I mean, what's so good about, where's the good product? The American suburb, the shitty strip mall Italian restaurant, or chicken parm?
Chicken parm's a great.
I gotta go. Let's wrap it up, because chicken parm is definitely
because it's really difficult to do. With it can very easily be rubbery. And if you don't get the sauce to cheese ratio, I thought you would appreciate this. Troy, this is my experience with good product 90% of the time.
I just don't think chicken parm is a particularly good product. I like eggplant parm better, but I mean,
that's offensive to America. That's all I'm saying. All right, this is fun. Well, I hope Alex will be back next week.
Yeah.
Is he doing like an Austrian goodbye? Let's see.
I think he's pissed off at you. All right. Thanks, everybody.
Appreciate it. Bye.
Bye.